Backyard Farmer is a co-production of NET Television and Nebraska Extension. Tonight on Backyard Farmer, we'll hear about why good soil is so vital to your gardens and landscapes, and we'll feature 2 pine diseases you'll want to get control of right now. That's all coming up next, right here on Backyard Farmer.
Again, and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd, and we're happy you've joined us for another hour of good gardening. Answering your garden questions, we have our panel of experts from Nebraska Extension and UNL Landscape Services. We have Jim Kalish this evening answering our insect questions.
Good evening, everybody.
We have turf and weed questions going to Rock Gaswa.
He's back. Glad to be here, Kim.
We have Rots and Spots with Lauren Giesler.
Always good to be here, Kim.
And Jeff Culbertson is going to answer all of the horticulture questions.
I'll try to answer all of them.
Since this is a taped program, we will not be answering the phone tonight, but you can still get us your questions for a future show, and you email us. That would be byf@unl.edu. Please remember to give us as much information about your question as you can, including where you live. We will not track you down. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for weekly gardening announcements and some pretty good information. Before we get to questions, we're going to start with samples, and Jim, those are beautiful.
They indeed are. I must attest to that. I was going to share that while you still have time in the landscape to be cleaning up all that debris and everything, and before we get all this full leafing out of trees and shrubs, you just might discover some exciting surprises. And one of them would be, this is a Cecropia cocoon, and it is the cocoon of the moth that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, the Cecropia moth. And this particular moth, or the caterpillar stage, feeds on willow, apple, plum, maple, and lilac. And so you'll see these at the end of the season, and they're kind of neat to just keep an eye out on, because that means that in probably about May, late May sometime, you'll start having these moths emerge, and they're beautiful moths, and they're nocturnal, meaning that they're active at night. So it's a bonus for your landscape. Now the second one that looks is lower on the screen is called a Polyphemus, and the cocoon itself is not spindle-shaped and pointed like the Cecropias. It's capsule-like, and it's wrapped with a couple dead leaves around it to help to conceal it. And so the Polyphemus moth as well, if you look at the moth itself, you notice it has large eye spots, and that is mimicry, so that during the daytime when it's resting, if some predator like a bird notices it and disturbs it, it will flash its wings, and that predator, of course, will think, hey, this has got to be an owl. I'm not going to touch it. You know, that kind of an attitude. So anyway, but they're also in the landscape too, and they have a bit of a narrower sort of a host plant range as larvae, maple, birch, and oak. But eventually, as you get into June and July, you're going to see these humongous, hopefully, humongous green caterpillars with colors and barbs and spines and all kinds of things on them. And they're just part of the wonderful pageantry. I always get this wrong because Fred's the expert. Pageantry of nature.
That's close enough.
That's close enough.
Thank you, Jim.
You
All
bet.
right, Rock, that is not turf.
It's definitely not, Kim. This is Forsythia. Most of our gardening friends know that what it is. But what I want to tell you about is that, so we've got these pre-emergent recommendations that happen all the time, and there's an old wives' tale that you can use Forsythia when it's blooming as an indicator of when to put your pre-emergence down. And that's actually about as far away from the truth as you can imagine, because we had Forsythia on campus blooming, when was it, Jeff, like 3-4 weeks ago?
Well, they've been on and off here, but you're right.
Yeah.
And they're blooming today.
Yeah, they get triggered and you know, with higher ambient temperatures. So the bottom line is that you always have to go by soil temperature if you really want to hit it on the head, and generally that's when soil temperatures are 50 or above. for an extended period of time, multiple days in a row. And right now, currently in the state of Nebraska, we're on the eastern part of the state, we're in the 40 to 44 range. And in the western Nebraska, amazingly, because they had a really warm day yesterday, they're a little bit higher than that. They're a little bit closer to 50. And remember, it's not soil temperature. These temperatures are taken down deeper in the profile, at least 2 to 4 inches. So don't just lay a thermometer on the top and say, oh, bonus day, let's put something out today. So generally in eastern Nebraska, our data clearly indicates that it's probably the first week in May for an absolute must-to time or drop-dead date for pre-emergent. But nope, don't put these out. We're not quite ready yet.
All right, thank you, Rock. All right, Lauren, what rotty thing do we have today?
Well, today I don't have anything rotty, but a lot of our viewers will be starting transplants or already have started those, or they'll be looking at some transplants maybe in the garden center. Just a couple things to watch for. Here I brought along today an example of a tomato plant that has just what could be virus symptoms. In this case, actually is. But when you're looking at your transplants as they're getting started, if you see any that have these shoestring leaves, which some of our different vegetables that will start can have seed-transmitted viruses, just make sure you're roguing those out early on and not introducing those viruses into the garden or the landscape. As well, when you're looking at buying new transplants, just make sure all of our garden centers do a nice job of controlling that and having quality transplants. But if it looks not like the normal one next to it, just make sure you're avoiding that in introduction to the garden. All
right, thank you, Lauren. Okay, Jeff, we kind of knew you'd bring this because you always do and you should.
Well, like Rock just had, some of our first flowering shrubs especially are yellow, and forsythia is one of those. The other one that does very well in our area is this dogwood. This is Cornelian cherry dogwood, Cornus moss. And so it's one of those incredibly hardy shrubs for our area. It flowers like this before anything else, before it leaves out. And then puts on a lovely red fruit that is a bit tart, but I've made lovely jelly out of it and jam, so I'm the only one in my household that'll eat it, but I think it's lovely. But anyway, so it can be kind of a big shrub to a small tree and very used in a lot of places in your landscape, will tolerate sun and shade and that sort of thing. So good plant for our landscape.
And pretty reliably hardy and in lots of spots. Yeah, just a beautiful thing. All right, thank you, gang. First picture question comes to you, Jim, and it's actually 2 evergreens, 2 viewers, probably 2 different creatures.
Okay.
We have a white pine that looks like that, and then the other one, I believe she's in Kearney, and you can see just that one little bitty thing. She calls it a worm, and she's seen them on other locations absolutely covering the needles.
Right,
so are these the same thing, or are they to
No, they're
worry about?
entirely 2 different kinds of insects. The first one, they're still in the same order of insects, but the first one is pine bark adelgid, and it's a aphid-like insect. It sucks through needle-like mouth parts the sap that would be in the tree and on the trunk and the major branches, and it creates this fuzzy material as a protective covering for it. Now, that's nice for us because we can readily notice it. And it does cause damage and can actually kill off branches. So one thing that's real easy to take care of them with is just the blast of a garden hose. Just blast them away if you have the ability to do that. Otherwise, use a coarse spray of something like neem oil or some kind of an insecticide, even pyrethrins or permethrin. But the key there is just blasting it with a coarse, powerful spray to knock them loose, and that will cut down their numbers. Now, the second one is called pine needle scale, and it can often look like somebody took white paint and splotched it all over the foliage of a pine or fir or even in spruce. And it happens to overwinter as an adult with eggs underneath it. And so just wait for a while until we get into about May, early May, and look and see if there's some tiny mite-sized crawlers that are all over the foliage, and they're ready to move out. They've hatched, and they're going to establish themselves somewhere and start to create their covering. And this stage is very vulnerable to any kind of insecticide, and so we would suggest that insecticidal soap would be fine, just several applications over that period, maybe when you first discover it, maybe over a week or 2. Or you can use insecticides, again, like I mentioned, nothing necessarily powerful. And you can also try to dislodge them again. And all that together will help to correct that situation. And again, you have another opportunity in late July, early August, because there are 2 generations of this scale per season.
All right, excellent. Thanks to that Western Nebraska viewer. All right, Rock, we've had this question already, and it must have been a good year, and it's vole damage in turf. And how do you repair the vole damage in the turf if you've given up on killing the voles?
Yeah, if the homeowner has, or if the viewer has bluegrass, it's pretty much going to fill in. I mean, it's going to look a little funky for a while. Actually, it'll green up closest around the perimeter of the vole travel, and it's because they're under snow and they're chewing away on everything. So bottom line is, if it's bluegrass, it's pretty much going to fill in. If it's fescue, a turf-type tall fescue, it'll spread a little bit. You know, there's some extensive damage in there, but it'll spread a little bit. Excuse me. But if they want to reseed, that's obviously possible. Just make sure they have the same seed that they used or something of similar color, because our worst thing is if you throw one of the newer cultivars into an old lawn, then you get these really dark green strips in the vole holes. So I'm going to say give it a chance. It'll probably recover fine. It may look a little bit strange, but by mid-June, you would probably know that it's not even there. The vole doesn't make a wide enough damage to really cause a problem.
All right, thank you, Rock. Lauren, this is a viewer in the Omaha area, and it's actually a double question. They have ewes they think are diseased, but then there's also kind of that yellowish piece of turf, and he's wondering if, he said that this started in the fall and then worsened over the winter. Is it disease? Is it abiotic? Is it, what is it, do you think, here?
Well, there's a couple things there. I'm wondering if we're not looking at some winter injury just by the light tan coloration on the top. Some of the darker branches where you see the whole branch is brown, you might want to take a careful look at that and just follow that down if there's some sort of physical injury on that branch. But that light tan discoloration that we see on the top, pretty much representative of what we'd see a lot of times with some winter desiccation. So I'd take a closer look at the larger branches that are brown and look for any damage, and you may want to submit a sample of that to the diagnostic lab just to get that cleared up. But the light tan, I would say, is just winter desiccation.
Okay, and Jeff, we don't usually want to prune those in the fall. Is that kind of...
Right, I don't think we want to prune those in the fall, and that may be kind of our problem. I wonder if it was a late summer, early fall pruning.
Okay.
They looked like they were freshly hedged.
All right, excellent. Jeff, this is a Pickrell, Nebraska viewer. They have a weeping flowering crab and has suckers at the base of the trunk, lots of them. And her question is, what can be done to permanently remove the suckers from this crabapple?
To permanently remove removing the tree would permanently remove the suckers. Unfortunately, once crabs start suckering, it's really difficult to get them to stop entirely. You know, if the tree, and from the pictures, the tree looks relatively healthy, but sometimes suckering is an indication that there's health problems with the tree itself. So at this stage, what I would suggest is going in and cutting the suckers back, and avoid doing any heavy pruning to the tree this year if you can. And many times a hard pruning will stimulate sucker growth on trees. So that would be the one thing. There are some products out there that, like a sucker stopper and some of those that I think some people think work really well. It concerns me when we are using something like that on the plant. We may, especially if it's a plant you want to keep. So I would just be vigilant about not allowing the suckers to get themselves well started and keep them pruned back.
And when she's in a bad mood, she can go prune those suckers.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right. Well, this season we are focusing on good soil. For our first feature tonight, UNL soil scientist Martha Mamo will tell us about the makeup of soil and how organic matter like compost can make any soil better.
Soils all over the world basically function in the same way. They provide nutrients to plants, they provide water to growing plants and living organisms in the soil. But they differ in terms of their characteristics because they are influenced by their environment. Whether you're in a forest versus in a prairie, the soil will look different because the environment where that soil is different. So generally, soil is a resilient medium. It takes a lot of beating before it is completely damaged. But there are ways to minimize the detrimental effect of traffic or other activities on the soil. One is you minimize traffic activity when the soil is wet. It's like a sponge. It carries water in it. So when we get rainfall, the water soaks into the soil and is held by the empty spaces like a sponge in the soil. When you remove those empty spaces because the soil is compacted, then your ability to hold water, the soil's ability to hold water, gets reduced. So compaction, especially in the urban setting, is one way you reduce the benefit that we get from soil, that is regulating water. So we can minimize the impact by reducing traffic when the soil is wet, by soil cover, that is having vegetation or some type of mulch cover to reduce the impact of rainfall beating on that soil. You can apply organic material to increase and expand the empty spaces that would benefit the soil or enhance the soil's ability to hold water again. So it's a long-term commitment. So you would have to add in and maintain, reduce the traffic to bring that soil back to almost its original point or original condition. The first thing you have to do, what are the limitations on that soil? Are you having waterlogging problems? Are you having issues with not enough nutrients for the plants that you're growing? So the first thing to do is identify what the problem is. And based on the problem, and pretty much organic matter amendment is the sure way to improve the soil, okay? For organic matter has several benefits. One, you provide the resources or the food that are required by the organisms that live in the soil, and there are a vast array of organisms living in the soil. Second, organic matter also provides the soil an ability to increase the amount of water it can soak in. So the first thing to identify is what is the problem in your soil, okay? And then from there on, find a solution to improve that soil. And again, this is a long-term commitment. Once the soil is degraded, to improve it will take a while.
A great garden always starts with great soil. And as we've just heard, treating that garden soil right by staying off of it when it's wet and adding lots of organic matter is really the first step to healthy plants and healthy produce. That's a hard thing to do in some seasons, but it's really, really important.
Tim, have you talked about the International Year of Soils yet?
We have.
Okay, good. Just so people know that
we have.
The United Nations declared the International Year of Soils, all kinds of stuff going on at Soil Science of America website.
Yep, very cool stuff. All right, Jim, you get the next question. This is from York, Nebraska. And last summer, she discovered to her horror that she had red raspberry bushes with tiny white worms inside many of the ripe raspberries. She didn't have any pictures of the worms, but we had a little conversation back and forth about whether it is, in fact, this dreaded beastie.
Right, the little worms will be maggots, and this is a small fruit fly, the same size as the common fruit flies that we see in late summer and in autumn. And this one is called a spotted-winged Drosophila. And it's a newcomer to our area, and it has no natural enemies that we can think of right now. So it's since for 2 years now, it has invaded Nebraska. And usually toward the end of the season, when the raspberries are maturing and another thin-skinned small fruits are also maturing, that's when it's a problem. The fly itself stabs the fruit and then inserts eggs in there, and so the larvae feed on the delicious fruit inside before we can. And so the best preventative, of course, is to monitor. And monitoring, you can actually make I think I actually have one here, but you can monitor let me show you here. But monitor using a simple jar with holes in it, and it doesn't have to be red colored, but put vinegar in it. And if you start putting that up probably about in mid-July, then when you start first picking up these spotted winged fruit flies, then you know that you ought to be looking at your crop itself and seeing, just looking for signs of their presence. And at that point, then you might have to treat, depending on what you find. But usually the treatments are fairly simple. It's something like a lightweight type of insecticide for a quick knockdown, and you have to do it fairly frequently to knock them down. Another aspect for control is to keep any of the fruit or any spoiled fruit that has hit the ground or whatever, keep that all cleaned up. So sanitation is really important. And then the final step, of course, would be that you would go ahead and harvest just a little bit early before they have opportunity to insert their eggs into that softer, fleshy fruit.
All right, thank you. Before you bite into the maggots.
They're still, they stay, I don't know, depending on what they are. In a cherry, they would probably taste like a cherry.
It'd be fruit-flavored maggots.
Fruit-flavored maggots.
A little bit on the pinkish
What
side.
a concept.
Lots of protein.
Not happening. Okay, Rock, this is a viewer who lives on a lake in Papillion. And she wants to know what to put down on the sand to control the weeds along the retaining wall and basically pretty much every place. Kids and dogs, so kid pet friendly and lake friendly. She doesn't want to dump chemicals into the water.
Yeah, there's only one thing she can use, and it's anything that contains corn gluten meal, which is basically a natural occurring organic weed control method. It does carry a fair amount of nitrogen, and it's tightly bound nitrogen. So I'd be careful about how close you put it to the lake edge. But up in those gravel beds and along there, it would probably be fine. There's no label restriction on it in terms of location or proximity to water, but I still would just be careful because it's probably going to push a bunch of nitrogen in the water if you get too close to the water's edge. Once again, you water it in just like you would a traditional pre-emergent herbicide, but it's made entirely from corn gluten meal. And there's a Preen Organic, there's a number of Earl May products that have the corn gluten meal in them, so feel free to use those in that particular area and it should be fine.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Rock. Lauren, this is a couple of viewers, both of whom think they have the same virus on slightly different crops and they had it last year. And they want to know what it is and what they can do to prevent it this year.
Okay. One, it looks like one's a zucchini there, and I think there's some different mosaic viruses that we'll see that affect many of our different cucurbit species. In general, just really good residue management and cleanup is going to help a lot because sometimes you'll get some vectors, depending on which virus it is, that could overwinter in that residue. So doing that, make sure you have really good, when you're getting those early plants up, some of them can be seed transmitted, like I visited a little bit earlier about, and so make sure you're roguing out any of the plants that look distorted in any nature that way. And then once you would see any symptoms in the plants or the vines, I would make sure that you're removing those because you will not be able to cure that virus from infection. So really some really good sanitation methods in general would be the first step. And then as you get into that, maybe if you get into a specific issue where you need to do some vector management and trying to control those insects that could move the disease.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Jeff, this is a Red Cloud viewer. She has a flowering almond, loves the south side of her house, starting to get a tad straggly. She wants to know when and how to trim and transplant. She knows she shouldn't trim now or she'll cut off all the flowers. Any suggestions on that? And she also wants to know if she can divide it.
Right. Well, I guess as far as pruning, I would wait till we're done with bloom here, which will be soon. And I would look at taking out, like we suggest with a lot of our shrubs, you can take out some of the bigger canes and then head some of those back to neaten it up a little bit. So I think that'd be fairly simple. The plant's not that big. As far as transplanting, again, I think I would look at waiting till next spring, early in the spring before it starts to push leaves. So maybe a couple weeks earlier than where we're at right now, early March. So we could look at doing it then. It's not going to be something you can divide necessarily. If you want to do some layering, if you want to take some of those long branches now and put them under the soil with some mulch and kind of keep that area moist, you may get some roots developing in that. It's a long-term thing. It may be a year or two before you have enough roots around those stems to cut off and then move somewhere else. So there's some good ideas. I know Sarah suggested looking things up, like whatever your question is with university behind it, and you'll get some good extension suggestions on how to do some propagation with the prunus.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Well, as the weather warms up, you're going to want to be out in your garden to get those cool weather crops planted. For this week's Green and Growing Tips, Sarah Browning stopped by to show us how to plant peas.
It's a little chilly in the Backyard Farmer garden today, only about 37 degrees. But after the last several warm days, soil temperatures are now up in the 40s, and that makes it a great time to plant garden peas. Peas love cool weather, and so they do best in spring and fall plantings. To plant peas in your garden, choose a nice sunny location, at least 6 hours of direct sun a day. They're not very particular about soil, as long as it's well drained. But they do prefer a neutral to a slightly alkaline soil. Decide on how you're going to plant your peas based on how big they're going to be. Tall vining types will need a trellis. The smaller bush types can be planted either in single rows or in a wide row planting, whereas the taller trellis types usually are planted in single rows. Dig a nice trench with a hoe and plant the peas about 4 inches apart, 1 inch deep in the soil. Then firm the soil back over the top of them. Keep them well watered. Peas need good moisture, at least about 1 inch of water a week during the growing season. Peas are light feeders, so don't provide too much nitrogen. Excessive nitrogen promotes a lot of leaf growth at the expense of fruits and flower buds.
There are a lot of veggies and flowers that have to wait a while to get planted in that warmer soil that Rock mentioned. But for things like peas and spinach, you go right ahead and get started and hope the birds don't peck those peas out of the ground. Okay, Jim, this is a viewer that said they unknowingly put grub treatment down. They think it was Bayer Advanced Imidacloprid, killed off the earthworms. Any way to get them back?
You sure it killed off the earthworms?
That's what they're saying.
I'm a little surprised by that because I wouldn't think that imidacloprid would do that.
Okay.
It's specifically designed for certain kinds of insects. And so
Earthworms are not one of them.
earthworms are so far removed in relatedness to insects. It might have been just a coincidence is perhaps my suggestion.
All right, excellent. So we have started our Twitter questions, and we actually we had a Twitter question last week that was under a limbed-up spruce tree, Rock. Grass has been planted twice. Why can't they get grass to grow? And what do they need to do under the tree? And we had some Twitter answers. And at Bohica Warriors said, acidic soil and excessive shade can prove difficult for turf growth. Clear low-lying branches and amend the soil. So what would you add to that, turf expert?
I would say don't try to plant turf where it doesn't belong, basically. And you know, I'm not a big fan of limbing up a spruce or something like that, but they've already done that. You know, to really limb it up effectively, you'd have to go up probably half the length of the tree to get enough light in there, and if they have other canopy trees in and around it. So if grass can't grow, there's a reason, and if it's growing really good outside the drip line or the tree, the branch line, that's telling you something, isn't it? So I'd say let's not let the needles drop, call it nature's mulch, and walk away.
Excellent. So that's going to be a fun thing that we're going to do every single week on the show. All right, Lauren, this is coming to you because of the disease question. It's a viewer who wants to know how to grow basket swan and birdhouse gourds in hills. And so what are the disease issues? And you kind of mentioned one already that they might expect to have to look for.
I guess, you know, the disease, some of those, the more common ones, you know, like we talked earlier about some of our viruses that we'll see. So your squash mosaic virus. And then also you may get into some, if they're overwatered, you can get into some root rots. You can see some powdery mildews, some things like that. But in general, if you're just doing this in the backyard for birdhouse production and not trying to do this commercially, I wouldn't worry too much about those disease problems. I would, you know, go ahead and do that. Make sure you're using good sanitation at the end of the year to get good control of anything that may have been harbored or overwinter in those for future plantings.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Jeff, spring is springing. This viewer, we don't know where she's from, but she says she has 2 early peony bushes that she says have sprouted.
Okay.
She wonders about being concerned with them freezing if our temps drop this week or this weekend.
Well, if it's something she's concerned about, she can always put a light layer of mulch over the top of them to protect them. That's what I would suggest. Peonies are pretty tough and they can handle a little bit of dip in temperature at this stage. So I wouldn't be overly concerned, but if it's something that you are seriously concerned with, I would just spread some mulch or compost or something over it lightly and then pull it back once things warm up.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Before we take a break, we'd like to take a minute to tell you about our garden. We're very busy getting things going in the greenhouse, and here to tell us more is UNL Extension Horticulture Assistant Terry James.
Going on in the Backyard Farmer Garden this week. However, we did get a really nice soaking rain earlier this week, so we are really excited about getting that soil ready and having it accept all of our great plants as soon as it's warm enough to start planting outdoors. We have a lot going on in the greenhouse. We have a lot of those warm season plants coming up, tomatoes, peppers. We're looking forward to seeing a lot of those new All-America Selection winter peppers that we have. It is not too late for you guys to start your own summer, warm season summer vegetables inside. Make sure you give them plenty of light. Start that light close to the seed bed as you can and start moving it up. That way you would have nice, healthy plants for you to start putting your vegetables out in your garden the same time the Backyard Farmer is putting their vegetables out in their garden.
It's time for a short break. Coming up on our show, we'll have Gladys's Plant of the Week and the Lightning Round. Stay tuned for more Backyard Farmer right after these messages. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. Later on in the program, Kevin Corris will show you a couple of pine diseases that you'll need to get control of as soon as possible. But right now, time for the lightning round. Are you ready, Jeff?
I think so.
We have a viewer in Superior, Nebraska that wants to know if avocados are hardy here.
No, they're not. But they're a fun plant to try. If you can get them going, you'll have to move them in and move them out, that sort of thing.
Keep talking.
Excellent. This is a Ravenna viewer who wants to know whether an arborvitae or a Dawn redwood would be good substitutes for spruce or pines.
Well, they would be different substitutes. Dawn redwood has done very well for us in eastern Nebraska, so that's one I would suggest.
Okay.
I would go with the Dawn redwood. It'd be a fun plant.
All right. Is there a thin-skinned cucumber variety that you would recommend?
You know, thin-skinned cucumbers are not my forte, so I would have to say, if you find a good one, stick with it.
Let you know. Can you use newspaper, and this viewer was specific to the World Herald, for mulch?
Yeah, you can. I mean, there's ways of using it, layering it in your landscape, so absolutely you can.
All right. Is it too early to plant trees?
No, it sure isn't. Great time.
Is it the right time to move peonies?
No, it's not. Wait till mid-August.
Excellent. Nice job. And Jim's telling you to keep talking.
Started out slow, but kicked it into hyperdrive.
Okay,
Looking for some
Lauren,
yes/no questions tonight.
Are you ready?
I'm ready like Brownsparger tonight, Kim. Going to feature a different lunch meat every week.
You talked about canker last week. Will it affect flowering dogwood as well as red twig dogwood?
I haven't seen it on flowering dogwood, so I would say red twig and yellow twig is more common.
All right. Are stinkhorn fungi more prevalent in wetter conditions or dry ones?
Wet conditions.
We had, this viewer had oak anthracnose last year. Can they expect that to return?
Most likely, especially if they have a wet spring.
Okay. Crown rot in a garden has been diagnosed in this is eastern Nebraska. Will the drier winter alleviate that, or will they always have it?
Crown rot can affect many different species. It's going to be in the soil.
Okay. You mentioned that you're supposed to hunt morels when the forsythia bloom.
Just like Rock talked about earlier with temperature, that's not always a good indicator because of just sudden change in ambient can change not the soil temperature. So you're going to have to wait.
Okay. This viewer has had a monster shelf fungus in their ash tree for 2 or 3 years. They're wondering not whether the ash is trash, but whether that thing is good to eat.
I'm going to count this as one on my score, and I'm going to go ahead and answer that because you took a long time to read that question. So anyway, shelf fungus can be an indicator of an internal rot inside the tree. So most likely I would look at it and watch that tree for any type of a hazard tree situation. If it's somewhere it can fall, you might want to carefully assess that.
All right, thank you, Lauren. You guys are doing a nice job.
Edible or not, though? That was the
Oh,
question. You didn't even answer the question.
I was worried about the
point for
viewers.
that.
No point for
There's no
Dandy
point
first.
for that.
Oh boy,
Not
the
edible.
competition kicks in. Are you ready, Rock?
Yes.
There is apparently a new buffalo grass in the buffalo grass breeding program at UNL. Is it shade and traffic tolerant?
Not shade tolerant. It's called Sundancer. It's a seeded variety. It's not shade tolerant. None of the buffalo grasses show much shade tolerance, but it is. It's relatively traffic tolerant.
Excellent. What is the soil temperature for seeding a new lawn in any part of the state, or does it vary?
It varies, but you can seed now and it'll just sit there and wait for something to happen. Birds may come in and eat a little bit, but it's not going to be a big deal.
Okay, why don't we use Bermuda grass here?
Because it dies in our winters, or if it survives, it's ugly as sin.
Okay. Should lime be used as a top dressing? It's sold in many garden centers.
If you don't have a soil test, then don't put anything on that you are wondering whether it'll work or not. So no, unless you get a requirement for lime, don't put it down.
Okay, this viewer has had their lawn aerated already. Is it okay to go ahead and seed?
Yeah, the only time we have a problem with that is if we get really, really cold temperatures, like 4 degrees or less. They'll get a little donut burn around the hole, but usually it survives fine.
Okay, what is the best turf for the Imperial area?
Turf type tall fescue tends to win most of the time, so I'm going to say turf type tall fescue does well there. It can be prone. The fall planting can be prone to winter kill, however.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Jim.
566.
Calmness.
Have a little shootout here.
You ready?
Yeah, we're ready. Yep.
Okay, this viewer up in the Fort Calhoun area had oleander aphids last year, and they're wondering if they should expect them on their plants again this year.
Always, they're native, and they always happen somewhere toward late July.
Okay. They have peaches that are blooming on this property. Is it too late to spray or treat for whatever sorts of insects bother peaches?
No, it's not too late. You should actually treat after petal fall, of course. And then the first pest maybe to think about is oriental fruit moth, where you have the actual terminals start to die off, because that's the first generation of oriental fruit moth.
Okay. Ticks are out at a Game and Parks lake near Lincoln. Is this really early for that?
Well, it'd be adult ticks, probably American dog tick. And as soon as it warms up, they're hungry and they're looking for something.
Okay. Is there a pre-emergent chigger control? This is a viewer who actually has a daycare and doesn't want her children to be chiggered.
I don't think there's pre-emergent. You can apply something early. Chigger season is usually in July, we could say even move it back to mid-June, late June. You could apply the bifenthrin product, which has mitocidal activity, and that would give you some, in conjunction with cutting the turf and everything like that, that would give you some protection, at least for a while, from chiggers.
Excellent.
A long answer number, or whatever it was, but
but
great information.
A very good information.
And by the way, so some of these Asian cucumbers, skin's not an issue. You just eat the whole thing.
Right.
Oh.
Like
Armenian
Orient Express.
Okay.
And they're very crisp, and you can cut them thin and chew them. They're very great with dip.
There you go.
There you go. Okay, Jeff, so what do we have for plants of the week?
Well, obviously, we have this blue Scilla here, so Siberian Scilla, and actually where I found Rock's sample for him, the ground was covered in it. It was really very nice. So they naturalized very nicely. And if you have an area that's a mulch area and you really don't know what to do with it, sometimes something like Scilla is really kind of a nice treat to it.
I'm glad I could help you out.
Yeah, that was very nice. And then the green leaf is boxwood. Mm-hmm. And so box actually is doing really well in this part of the state. I think with our milder weather, it seems to be doing quite well. Mine at home flowered really nicely about a week or so ago. So it's not a real showy flower, but it was just kind of fun this time of year to have something in flower. So, and then our yellow plant is Cornelian cherry dogwood, the plant of the week here at Backyard Farmer.
And the plant of the week on campus and any place else where it's blooming. So nice combination. And that Scilla, I think the only issue with that is it goes dormant, doesn't it, after it flowers?
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
so
It kind of disappears.
Yeah, you can mow right over it,
Right.
which is kind of fun. Cool. All righty, you get the next picture question,
Okay.
Jim. This is actually, we have several viewers who have questioned this, and it's these dark things hanging in the trees in the ash, and I think we have a couple pictures, one in the winter and one that might be August on this one.
Yeah. That usually happens on male ash trees, and those are the inflorescences or flowers. It's called ash flower gall. And while it poses no threat whatsoever to ash trees, it can be unsightly. There really is nothing that is labeled for treating the mites that cause these galls, but should a person want to try, and if it's a reasonable situation where the tree is not too large, you could try something such as right at this time, actually, because the window is going to close, but try something like neem oil or a horticultural spray oil, perhaps an insecticidal soap. And the mites themselves overwinter in bark scales and some of those old galls as well. And then they'll be moving to the more succulent parts of the tree. So you can try it, but it's your own experiment to try to find out if it has any effect or not. And you would know next year with the population cut down, or just, you might know in a few months, but
all right.
It's just one thing that we live with, I believe. You know, there's not much you can do about it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Rock, this is a viewer that wants to know about moss growing in a small area of the yard, a significant reduction in sun into an already shady area. They could thin a tree, they have a tall evergreen. They've lots of issues here, but mostly moss in the lawn.
The viewer sort of answered the question already, and you know, there are products you can buy. They're generally iron sulfate, copper sulfate, or ammonium sulfate. So one of them contains fertilizer, the other two won't. You can buy them in, in a bag at most of the garden stores, and they'll give you temporary relief, but the moss is such an ornery little critter of a plant. It's not even a higher plant. It has no root system, so you can't really hoe it out and do anything. But it does produce like a gazillion spores, actually 8 million spores per plant. And so you bust it up and knock it back and irritate it, and then it dries down, and then the spores are released, and you're back to square one. They've got to do something about that location or not grow grass. And this is the second time tonight I've said not grow grass. But it's obviously too wet. It's too shady. I bet it's got an exposure issue going on too. So maybe that's an area where you think about some wet-loving, maybe some sort of other plant or mulch, and give up on the turf. They said they could limb up a tree. Maybe they could get enough in there. There's probably an airflow problem. I mean, they clearly identified that that's not a place where, so unless they correct those, they can buy that thing by the truckload, the products by the truckload. They're never going to get rid of the moss. It's just going to keep on coming back time and time again.
Okay, thanks, Rock. Lauren, Amy mentioned that up in her neck of the woods, there's some snow mold issues this year. And we kind of stole some pictures from last year's snow mold. Do you want to talk a little bit about that particular malady?
Well, this is a fungus that causes problems when we get snow cover and warmer days is what really leads to this. And it's something that you really can't manage when you see it. Like now, it's something that you would manage with a late fall, or winter, early winter application to the turf. So. Unfortunately, at this time when our homeowners see it, now the landscape or the turf managers, like you see in this picture on greens and such, that when they know they're prone to this, they'll make applications in the late fall. But at this point right now, for homeowners that are watching, I wouldn't really recommend anything outside of just, looking at renovating that area. If the spots, see what greens up, sometimes you will get some regrowth in those areas and it may be fine. If you see those areas not greening up, then you may want to do some overseeding to fill that in. But it really just depends on how extensive the damage is, and how big areas that you have affected, and then just watch green up and just see how that progresses.
Excellent, thank you, Lauren. Jeff, this is a Sarpy County viewer. They have a skyline honey locust, and they want to know when it's all right to prune it, and there's actually, I don't know if we can see it in there, but there's a red, there it is, a red arrow, and they're wondering if they should take that side off.
Right. Right now, we ideally we want to do our pruning before we start putting on leaves and have bud break, and so we're kind of on the cusp of that right now. And I would say if this weekend they have time, this would be a good time to go in there and do that. The bark is going to be pretty thin right now, so you want to be careful when we're removing that branch. I wouldn't take it right next to that branch union, but up a foot or so, make your cut there, and then go down a little bit closer to that, and then you can take it off safely without tearing the bark. And there's actually, I noticed there was another branch farther up closer to the leader where it's split into two, and they might as well take it at this point. And then that tree really looks pretty good, so it'll be pruned for a while.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Well, one of the bonuses of starting our season earlier this year is that we can spotlight some early disease treatments that we really couldn't do in past seasons. Kevin Corris is here to tell us about 2 pine diseases that might need spraying in the spring.
Good sanitation may not be enough to gain adequate control of fungal needle blights in pine trees. Oftentimes, protective fungicides are needed to gain the control you want. There are 2 types of fungal needle blights of pine here in the Midwest. We have Dothystroma needle blight and Diplodia needle blight. The first thing you might need to do if you feel that you have a needle blight on your pine trees is get a diagnosis. For Dothystroma needle blight, fungicides with the active ingredient mancozeb or copper-based products will provide adequate control and need to be applied around mid-May. For Diplodia tip blight control, fungicides containing the active ingredient thiophanate methyl, propiconazole, chlorothalonil, or copper-based products will provide adequate control. With Diplodia tip blight, these products need to be applied at bud break, and depending on the product, may need to be reapplied every couple of weeks until the candle has fully emerged. Dothystroma needle blight will only affect second-year needles or older, and what you'll see is that from the point of infection towards the tip of the needle, that entire needle will die. But from the point of infection down to where that needle is attached to the fascicle of the tree, that needle will remain healthy. So you have a zone of dead needles towards the outside of a branch, and the inner needles are still alive. With Diplodia tip blight, only the tips or the newly elongating candles will be affected and die. So just this year's brand new candles that are emerging will eventually turn brown and die when you have Diplodia tip blight. Oftentimes trees aren't severely infected unless you have repeat infections year after year. You will experience some limb or branch dieback with these needle blights, but the death of the entire tree won't occur unless you have continuous infection year after year. So this is the time of year when we need to start thinking about applying these fungicides if you have a history of pine needle blights in your landscape.
Keep a close eye on your pines this time of year, and do make sure you get them treated early if you're going to treat, especially for Diplodia tip blight. Do that sanitation first, and that might take care of the problem. All right, Jim, you get a picture, and this is again a viewer from last year. I really like when viewers do this. They had worms in their sour cherries last year. Not a good thing, that protein. They want to know how to prevent it this year, and are they too late?
No, they're actually not too late. Usually, Lauren and myself will do this where we recommend a fruit tree orchard spray because it covers all these potential pests or diseases through the season. Now, if you want to try to time this more closely, this is plum curculio in cherry, and after petal fall, that's when it's usually evident both in cherry and on apple. You'll see these little feeding scars. Or you can set out a sticky trap and see if you can see these little weevils. So you got to get familiar with plum curculio. And on a sticky trap or whatever, you start seeing them, then you can go ahead and treat your cherries with the appropriate insecticide. But I would still recommend using an orchard or fruit tree spray simply because it's going to cover all the potential and possibilities that most likely will occur.
All right, excellent. Rock, this is a viewer in eastern Nebraska that has a weed with tiny little bitty leaves and then tiny little bitty flowers that look like bitty daisies.
This is common chickweed. It's a winter annual. It's going to start flowering now. It'll flower prolifically, set seed. Interestingly enough, it sets seeds about the same time it flowers, so it'll pop seeds out for next year. But winter annuals are controlled with a pre-emergence in the fall of the year, unlike crabgrass and whatever. It's relatively easy to rake out or pull, so that's probably what I would recommend doing. I wouldn't reach for the 2,4-D and start spraying away. There's really no need to. It usually invades very, very small or very, very not very dense, not very much ground cover. So under mulch usually takes care of it, a good layer of mulch, or in the lawn, usually a thick lawn takes care of it. So just to get it raked up and then throw down some mulch if it's a planting bed, and then if it's turf, just get it growing well.
Excellent. Lauren, this is also from last fall. In fact, this picture came in, I think, in late October. Quaking aspen. that has issues on the foliage. They wonder what it is, and again, how can they stop it from happening this year?
Well, a lot of times with aspen, we'll see a septoria leaf spot. We'll see these on cottonwoods as well. It really just depends on how much damage you're seeing. You can use, there are some foliar fungicide sprays that you can treat the tree with. Unless it's a young tree in general, it's not going to kill the tree. It's just a matter of if you want to try to manage that leaf fall or not. So if you're trying to manage it though, I would go to the garden center and look at, something with probably even a mycobutanil is going to do a nice job as a tree spray, but something that has an active that you're going to get an extended protection. So a propiconazole, a mycobutanil, one of those would do a nice job on that. And after you get full leaf development.
All right, thank you, Lauren. This is a viewer, Jeff, who just bought an acreage and has this ancient old plum and wants to know, is it possible to propagate and or rejuvenate?
I don't know if I'd rejuvenate at this stage. And if it's something you want to try to maintain, a couple things. If you have fruit, you could try, plums are pretty easy to grow from seeds, so that would be one thing. It may not be exactly true to the plant, but you would get some sort of progeny from that. And the other thing would be to take a cutting or do some sort of layering. And again, it's a little bit detailed process, but there is some good information on the web about prunus or plum cuttings and how to do that. So there's a couple different methods that would be fairly easy to do.
All right, and that was an ancient old guy. So we have our Twitter question for the coming week. And again, we want to make sure those of you who tweet what you think the answer is, and we'll see if our panelists next week can answer. Wild violets are taking over my beds around my house and yard. I have pulled, dug, sprayed. How do I get rid of them? So you can tweet that answer back to @BYFUNL. We will pick one and we'll see if we can stump the chump next week. We have one announcement this week, which is that the Maxwell Arboretum First Tuesdays walking tours begin April 7th, noon to 1. You meet at the Lurch Gazebo and see all sorts of wonderful things that are breaking bud or crawling or doing something on the landscape. All righty, Jim, we have a question for you. This is a viewer that has a 110-year-old house, and then they have flies everywhere. They die in every single day. They sweep up 12 to 20. They've found dead flies in all these different rooms. They wonder what these flies are and what to do about them.
Yeah, the age of the house really doesn't matter. Most of the time, these are in houses would be in smaller communities or on the edge of the town, where there's a lot of agriculture going on and livestock around, because the main flies that infest houses, and they're just using it for shelter for the wintertime, would be face flies and cluster flies. And so they are an on and off problem when you have warm days, and they're moving out into the landscape now, so there's really no point in trying to control them. The key is next year in the autumn, when the chills of October start to happen, make sure that you have everything sealed up well around the windows and vents, etc., and to exclude them or keep them from getting inside. Face flies and cluster flies.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. Rock, this is a viewer in the Omaha area who wants to know a good place to buy native seed. They want a no-mow area of their lawn.
Where to buy it? Probably Stock Seed Farms. They also carry our buffalo grass varieties. They're a member of the Native Turf Group. But Stock Seed Farms has a wondrous selection, and a lot of them are grown right there, so you know it's local, and you support one of our local people. So Stock Seed Farms in Murdoch, just look it up on, I think it's called stockseed.com.
Excellent, thank you, Rock. Lauren, this is also a Ravenna viewer. They got a lot of hail last July. All the branches on their young apples and maples are scarred and split. You can see some bare wood. They want to know how to keep them healthy, and more importantly, what can they expect for disease in particular entering those wounds?
Well, unfortunately, when you get wounds like that, there's not a lot you can do except prune some of the branches away that have significant damage, and you're probably just going to want to watch those. They will naturally heal to some degree. But if you had extensive damage from hailstorms, you may want to start looking at some replacement trees, because over time those trees are probably going to decline. Now that said, they may be fine. I don't know the level of damage that you have, but some of those areas last year got hit really hard, and you may want to start planting another tree close by.
And they may want to send us some pictures of that.
Yeah, you could do that
Assess
as well.
that.
But
Okay.
you're just going to have to watch how they recover.
Okay, thanks. Jeff, this is a viewer who actually does have to move some peonies because of some construction. They're about 6 to 8 inches tall. They know fall is best, but
Sure.
if they really have to, what do they do?
Well, I would just gently, what I would suggest is using something like a potato fork and kind of working around the plant, lifting them, making sure that you prepare your area, have some good soil, mix in some compost, and make sure you don't plant them too deep. So that's the real key with the peonies, is making sure that they're at the right depth. And, water them and keep an eye on them. They'll probably be fine.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. We have a little less than a minute, Jim. This is a Kearney viewer who wants to know what he can do to protect peaches from borers.
The first peach tree borer would be lesser peach tree borer, and that's in June. So mainly treat the trunk and the lower branches. Probably in early June, a good product would be bifenthrin, which lasts for a long time, but don't get it on the foliage or anything like that. And give that a try. And then later on in July, you have another peach tree borer, the peach tree borer. And so treatment again along those lines would be advised as well.
Okay, so to be able to get those darn peaches, you're doing something other than buying them at the farmer's market. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have for Backyard Farmer. We want to say thanks to our panel for a really good show and to everybody who submitted questions and pictures. Next time on Backyard Farmer, we'll be returning to the topic of soil. Our turfgrass specialist, Bill Kreuzer, will show us how to take a soil sample and why it's important for you to do that. We'll also hear about some good pruning techniques for your fruit trees. Also, don't forget to check out our final episode of Lifestyle Gardening this Saturday on NET1. So good night, good gardening, and we'll see you all next week right here on Backyard Farmer.